Hello, I'm Maria Titizian.
And I'm Rubina Margosian, and this is the Week in Review.
Every week, we bring you the stories shaping Armenia and the region.
From politics and policy to social issues and conflict, we break down the news and what it means for you.
This week in the news, Armenians around the world mark the 111th anniversary of the Armenian Genocide. Azerbaijan destroys the Armenian cathedral in Stepanakert, and Armenia and France to sign strategic partnership during Macron's state visit to the country. These stories and more in our weekly roundup of the news.
Today marks the 111th anniversary of the Armenian Genocide, as Armenians around the world commemorate the Ottoman Empire's systemic attempt to annihilate the Armenian people beginning in 1915. In Yerevan, tens of thousands gathered on the eve of April 24 for the annual torchlight procession from Republic Square to the Stepanakert Genocide Memorial. From early morning today, streams of people made their way to the memorial, laying flowers at the eternal flame. Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan, President Vagan Khachaturian, and National Assembly Speaker Alan Simonian led members of the government in paying their respects to the martyrs. Catholicos Garagan II also led a prayer at the memorial alongside senior clergy, although Armenia's public broadcaster, Hamek, did not air his sermon. In a separate statement, the Catholicos said that a century after the catastrophic events of 1915, when it seemed such terrible crimes were a thing of the past, new genocidal acts depopulated Artsakh. In a televised address marking the anniversary of the genocide, Prime Minister Pashinyan paid tribute to the victims who were massacred, deported, and starved to death for no reason other than being Armenian, calling the genocide the greatest tragedy in Armenian history. He framed his message around the future, arguing that the primary guarantee against such a catastrophe is the strengthening of Armenia's statehood and the establishment of lasting peace. Pashinyan stressed that Armenians must anchor their national aspirations within the internationally recognized borders of the Republic of Armenia rather than seeking a homeland beyond them. He also pushed back against narratives of limitation, insisting that Armenia's territory is sufficient for national development and that millions of Armenians could live, build, and prosper within it.
Armenia and France are set to sign a strategic partnership agreement during President Emmanuel Macron's state visit to Yerevan in early May. Armenia's Deputy Foreign Minister Vahan Kostanyan said the agreement will cover areas including education, military technical cooperation, and artificial intelligence. The plan was first announced almost a year earlier in May 2025 when French Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot revealed during his visit to Armenia that Paris and Yerevan will formally elevate ties to a strategic partnership. Franco-Armenian relations have significantly deepened in recent years, with Paris emerging as one of Armenia's closest partners in security matters, providing both equipment and training. According to the French Defense Ministry report, Yerevan has procured armaments worth about 280 million euros in 2023 and 2024. Macron is expected to be in Armenia on May 5 to take part in a EU-Armenia summit alongside other European leaders. In the meantime, France's minister delegate to the Minister of the Armed Forces, Alice Ruffo, was in Armenia this week. She met with Prime Minister Pashinyan and Defense Minister Surem Babikyan to discuss defense cooperation.
And emerged this week that Azerbaijan has completely demolished the main cathedral in Stepanakert, the capital of Nagorno-Karabakh, Artsakh. Construction of the cathedral began in 2006 and it was consecrated in 2019. Visible from across the city, it became a refuge for thousands of civilians during the 2020 war in Artsakh. Satellite imagery confirms that the structure was destroyed sometime between early March and early April. Its demolition follows the recent leveling of the smaller St. Hagop Church in Stepanakert and comes 2 years after the complete destruction of the 19th century Ganachjam Church in Shushi. Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan said the Armenian government is unlikely to raise the issue at the international level, describing such matters as double-edged, emphasizing the need for caution and noting that based on past experience, they rarely gain traction in international forums. The Armenian Apostolic Church strongly condemned the destruction, calling on the government to take urgent and effective steps to halt what it described as the systemic erasure of Artsakh spiritual and cultural heritage.
This week, the European Council officially established the EU partnership in Armenia. It's called EUPM Armenia, aimed at strengthening the country's democratic resilience and crisis response capacity. The mission will support Armenia in countering complex threats, including, of course, FIMI, which is foreign information manipulation and interference, cyber attacks, and illicit financial flows. It will provide strategic and operational guidance to state institutions, help build institutional capacity, and support a coordinated whole-of-government approach while also implementing targeted projects in cooperation with international partners. The mission will have an initial mandate of 2 years. Head of mission is expected to be appointed shortly to lead operations on the ground, and over time, EUPM Armenia is expected to replace the EU mission in Armenia, which is EUMA, launched in early 2023 to patrol the border with Azerbaijan, whose mandate runs until February 2027. Armenia's foreign ministry welcomed the decision, noting that it was adopted at Yerevan's request and forms part of the broader Armenia-EU strategic agenda.
In its annual report, The State of World's Human Rights, Amnesty International raised concerns over a lack of accountability for unlawful police actions in Armenia, citing weak penalties and insufficient oversight mechanisms. The organization also says displaced people from Nagorno-Karabakh continue to face difficulties accessing housing and employment. It adds that lawsuits against journalists and human rights defenders are restricting free expression, noting that 29 cases were filed between April and June of 2025 on charges of insult or defamation. The report further warns that a new law expanding mass facial recognition surveillance breaches privacy rights.
And this week, Russian officials, not surprisingly, warned Armenia and Georgia over potential EU accession tracks, framing closer European ties as damaging to both countries. The Deputy Secretary of Russia's Security Council claimed that EU membership would cost Armenia roughly 23% of its GDP, with domestic consumption falling more than 20% and inflation rising by 23%. I mean, those are crazy numbers, Rubina, but I mean, I guess you could say whatever you want if you were the Deputy Secretary. He added that leaving the Eurasian Economic Union alone would shrink Armenia's GDP by 15%, slash industrial output by over a quarter, and push unemployment up by 6.5 points. I don't know where they're getting their data or how they're coming to these conclusions, but nonetheless, Russia's Foreign Ministry spokesperson Maria Zakharova warned that EU accession could see Georgia added to Russia's list of unfriendly countries, triggering economic measures. She argued membership would harm Georgia's tourism industry, disrupt family ties between Georgians and Russians, and strip Georgia of preferential trade arrangements with Russia and CIS countries, which she described as its main export markets. As a reminder, Georgia was granted EU candidate status in 2023, but suspended its accession bid in 2024 after, elections in Georgia, as we all know, with Georgian Dream coming to power. And EU officials have said membership prospects under the current government remain very slim. And
looks like neither Armenia nor Georgia can exist if Russia wasn't around.
Exactly, yes.
Well, Ruben Vartanian has called on Armenia's human rights defender to consider visiting Baku. In a message conveyed through his family, Vartanian said Azerbaijani officials, especially Azerbaijan's ombudsperson, have expressed readiness to facilitate such a visit and criticized what he described as a lack of initiative from Armenian institutions on detainee rights. He called for greater coordination and transparency on efforts to address the issue. Well, he was basically addressing the human rights defender in Armenia and saying that you should visit because the Azerbaijani ombudsperson told me that they've been in touch with you and you're not responding, and this should be done under the auspices of the government and Pashinyan himself, and you should also facilitate so that my family and my wife is ready to visit Baku and the families of other detainees are able also to visit. So it was and he addressed like a couple of questions to the ombudsperson in Armenia, and at first he was actually checking, is what I'm told in Baku right? Are you guys in contact? Armenia's human rights defender Anahit Manasyan responded that her office does not engage in foreign policy and or operate outside Armenia's jurisdiction and has not received any official proposal regarding such a visit. She reiterated that all Armenian detainees in Azerbaijan should be released without delay, stressing the urgency of the issue for both human rights and the broader peace process. She was very detailed, also saying that we only have jurisdiction within Armenia and the facilitation for visits should be also, managed by international human rights organizations. We don't have a mandate to facilitate
Right.
that.
And Vartanyan raised this issue because, as we all know, the International Committee for the Red Cross no longer operates in Azerbaijan. There's no third-party oversight checking in on these POWs and detainees, and their families haven't been able to get in touch with them. It's a horrible situation, but obviously Manasyan's office said what they said, and they can't do anything at the moment. And it's surprising to me that he would even believe the Azerbaijani ombudsperson's
the message was
remarks.
very interesting because at the beginning it started, at least to me, sounded like an accusation, but then when there were like pointed questions, the first question was, is this true?
Yeah, indeed. Well, Rubina, 8 years ago, we were in a different place, weren't we? It was on April 23, I believe, that Serge Sarkisyan, Prime Minister at the time, resigned during the Velvet Revolution. And on that occasion, Serge Sarkisyan this week, he reflected on the anniversary of his resignation and obviously paved the way for Nikol Pashinyan to come to power. So in his public message, he described his 2018 decision to seek the post of Prime Minister, despite earlier promises not to, as both his most correct and most difficult choice, but ultimately his biggest mistake. Again, just for a little bit of background, in 2015, they changed the constitution, as every administration in Armenia has done since independence. We went from a presidential to a parliamentary system. At the time, Serge Sarkisyan promised that he wasn't going to be seeking a third term as prime minister, which he did, and this triggered everything that happened after that. So he admits that it was his biggest mistake. He said he failed to convince the public that his move was driven not by a desire to retain power, but by concerns over the security of Armenia and Artsakh.
May we remind him that the 4-Day War happened when
he was in power. Well, he argued that at the time, he believed a change in the negotiator during a sensitive phase in talks could have serious consequences, and said subsequent developments proved those concerns justified because, yes, as you said, Rubina, in 2016, after the 4-Day War, it was very clear to everybody, and it should have been even clearer to the leadership, that Azerbaijan was preparing for a large-scale offensive, right? So that's why he's arguing that he should have stayed in power to be the negotiator. And had he stayed in power, he's alluding that we would not have had the 2020 Artsakh war.
Well, they were options. He could have, he had a whole system, and the Republican Party.
Somebody else could have ran.
And he could have been,
the chief negotiator.
The chief negotiator and defense minister. It wasn't just his person. So it was no longer a super presidential country at that point. So
that's right.
Whatever he's saying is not making that much sense. But also he's taking a page out of Pashinyan's tactics, saying, I should have communicated better. I should have been more truthful at the time, but I was concerned about how people will take it. So we've heard this. Well, I guess he thinks Pashinyan's approach is working, so he's adopting it.
Well, he acknowledges, like you said, failing to communicate this effectively and accusing Pashinyan of misleading the public. He also said he is once again acting in line with public sentiment, announcing that neither he nor his Republican Party will participate in upcoming elections to mitigate accusations, or to, I guess, alleviate accusations that their participation would contribute to the continuity of the current administration. He said that the decision is intended to avoid influencing voters and to give other opposition forces space to challenge the current government.
This is such a weird logic here, saying
it's
we're
Armenia.
acknowledging that people hate us so much that if we participate, we will influence the vote, where more people will be voting for Pashinyan.
Yeah. Wait, no, to be fair, he might be saying that we're splitting the opposition vote. So since the Armenia Alliance is running and Strong Armenia is you could interpret it that way too.
Meanwhile, Armenia's anti-corruption court has ordered the confiscation of assets deemed to be of illegal origin from Ani Sarkisyan, the niece of Serge Sarkisyan. The ruling includes 39,341 shares in the Areni hydropower plant, as well as bank deposits totaling to around $864,000, 10.2 million Armenian drams, and almost 5,000 euros, along with accrued interest.
Well, Citizens' Day, which will be marked this year with a large concert in Republic Square, has drawn criticism from the Independent Observer Alliance, which says the event amounts to campaign activity by the ruling party. The concert, titled Voice of Peace, will take place on April 25 and will feature local and international performers, including Iveta Muguchian, who I know. The others I don't know. It just shows you my age. Outlandish, Ingrid, Willie Williams, William and Imani. I don't know. Apparently, they're well-known performers, and the admission is free, obviously. The event comes as peace features prominently in the ruling Civil Contracts Party's messaging ahead of the parliamentary elections. The watchdog argues that the concert, including the one they held in Gyumri last week, should be treated as a campaign-related expense under the law on political parties, adding that its financing appears to fall outside the legal limits. The group says it has filed a complaint with the Corruption Prevention Commission requesting a legal assessment. And again, as a reminder, this Citizens' Day was introduced after the 2018 revolution by Nikol Pashinyan to celebrate the role of citizens in bringing about political change. And we've been talking about campaign spending, right? We did our little video, it has to be said. And all of this is very moot because the official campaign hasn't started. So all of this money that's being spent.
It's also just not the concert. There's a Khorovats party on Armenian Street
there?
adjacent to
Really?
Yeah,
Oh, I'm going. There you go.
Well, the Independent Observer Alliance said that the April 23 torchlight procession should also be treated as a party event organized by the Armenian Revolutionary Federation, a member of the Armenian Alliance, and therefore subject to regulations governing political party financing. It said it is reviewing the case and may file a complaint with the Corruption Prevention Commission. But to be fair,
They do this every
year, and it's not every year that the
There's
elections are around.
elections, exactly.
Well, the group also reported alleged violations in the recent activities of the My Step Foundation and has appealed to the administrative court seeking to hold its executive director, Anna Hagopian, wife of Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan, former wife. Are they back? And
I don't know,
another
they're
talk
strange.
this
That's
week if
another
they're back
gossip.
together because she went to Gyumri for the
Well,
concert.
he
and
said he's looking forward to saving his family, and they've been working to
Yes,
reconcile.
He said he respected her decision, didn't mean that he was at peace with it, so he's trying again. Anyway, the Independent Observer Alliance says Anna Hagopian should be held accountable on 15 counts of administrative,
Violations, alleged
liability.
violations, right? And as always, every week we come to our favorite part of the podcast, which is the elections digest, said with a lot of sarcasm. But I guess we have to talk about it. Yes, in election news, the application period for political forces to participate in Armenia's June parliamentary elections has closed. 19 parties and alliances have submitted applications to the Central Electoral Commission, which will review them through May 3, because the CEC can say, yes, you can run, or you haven't fulfilled all of the...
Yes, you don't meet the criteria, something
right.
is missing, you're not a citizen of this country, you can't participate.
The sarcasm continues. Well, among them is a civil contract party led by incumbent Nikol Pashinyan. Other applicants include Prosperous Armenia, which is led by businessman Gagik Tsarukyan, as we all know, and the Meritocratic Party of Armenia, headed by a political commentator by the name of Gurgen Simonyan. The I Am Against Everyone, DMM, Democratic Party, has a Spartak Gyuregyan listed as its prime ministerial candidate, though he remains a very little-known figure.
You know, they're interesting because recently
Are
I
they?
saw a van with their name and a lot of stickers parked right outside the Central Electoral Commission. And there's a very hipster cafe right there. I don't know which one they're targeting, but
I
it's
think-
working.
aren't they a
That's
bunch of
strategically
hipsters
very,
anyway?
very interesting location to just have
Have
a
the van.
presence. Yeah.
Well, Strong Armenia, as we know, is alliance is officially led by Narek Garabedyan, but in fact they want his uncle Sambel Garabedyan to become prime minister, which they plan on doing after they win elections and then changing the constitution and so on and so forth. The Democratic Consolidation Party, headed by political activist Suren Bedrosyan, who ran in the 2023 Yerevan municipal elections was present during the 2024 protest led by Bagrat Gadastanyan. The Wings of Unity Party, as we all know, led by human rights defender Arman Tatoyan, while the Bright Armenia Party, headed by former ambassador at large Edmond Maroukian. It seemed like Edmond Maroukian was looking for a place to land and he couldn't, so then his party decided to run on its own, right?
Yes.
Without an alliance. Then we have the Pan-Armenian National Democratic Pole. This is an offshoot of the Sasna Zrer movement, is also running. Armenia Alliance, as we know, led by former President Robert Kocharyan in alliance with the Armenian Revolutionary Federation. Other parties include the Christian Democratic Party. This is led by Levon Shirinyan. Armenian National Congress, founded by Armenia's first president, Levon Der-Bedrosyan. It is going to be led by Levon Zurabyan. There's a whole bunch here. I mean, we could
And
go
interesting,
on. Yeah. Well, let me just mention this
yeah.
one too, Rup. The New Force Reformist Party. They have really bad names, right? What does that mean?
At one point you run out of names for good political parties.
How many can you
how
have?
Per capita we probably have the most political parties
and
ever.
Police officers, but that's a topic for another day. So the new force reformist party is headed by former Yerevan mayor Haik Marutyan, and then the Republic Party, of course, led by former Prime Minister Aram Sarkisyan, and then there's a whole bunch of others. Should I name them? Sure, why not? Alliance Progressive Centrist Party, Dikran Urikhanyan, who used to be member of the Prosperous Armenia. The Reformist Party, led by former Defense Minister Varashag Harutyunyan. The Democracy, Law and Discipline Party, led by Vartan Khugasyan, also known as Dog. But isn't Dog in prison in Vegas?
It is astonishing to me how many people are running in these elections that are either under house arrest in prison or have formerly been incarcerated.
And who are not eligible to run.
It's fascinating.
It really is. Well, I mean, look, we have a lot to look forward to.
Well, including the current prime minister, actually. Yeah, sure. Let's not forget that.
He was on the run. Yeah, well, the Republic Democracy Defenders Alliance Party, that's a mouthful, led by former MP Arman Babajanyan, has also applied to the CEC. He's a supporter of Armenia's EU track. He was one of the initiators of the civil initiative that led to the adoption of the Armenia EU accession bill. And another, a smaller, less prominent, this is the best, the Kochari National Revival and Awakening of the Nation Party.
Well, this last party, they don't really need a program because everything is in the name.
Right, because they're dancing, singing, yeah.
Interestingly, negotiations between parties for alliances didn't work out very well. No. What is happening now, everyone's saying, well, after the election, after the vote, we will endorse each other.
Sure.
This brings us to former Bright Armenia member Mane Tandilyan's Country to Live party, who has joined the Strong Armenia Alliance ahead of the upcoming parliamentary elections.
Which isn't surprising, considering that she was running with Ruben Vartanyan at one point, right?
Which is also very surprising to me because she was an independent candidate with her programs and, well...
What happened?
She didn't pass the threshold.
There you go.
Despite the money and the campaigning during last election when she started ahead of time and was one of the more visible campaigns. And also outlandish with the cable cards that were going to become to the opera almost. That was going to be it.
Yeah.
Yes. And
I'm waiting for that.
And the fountains in all of Armenia's cross-sections that were going to purify the air. Well, Tandilyan previously served as Armenia's Minister of Labor and Social Affairs. This was in 2018 and later held the same position in Artsakh from December 2020 until August 2021. In a statement, the party said Armenia is facing serious security, political, and value-based challenges that require national consolidation and clear political will. It said the two forces have signed a memorandum to combine their resources and to form a unified electoral agenda. Does this mean that the resources of two Russian Armenian oligarchs are being combined here?
Sounds like it.
And Samuel Karapetyan's. As if a couple of billion wasn't enough. We need more.
We need more.
The statement added that the agreement envisions the integration of the country to live in parties, regional teams into the Strong Armenia Alliance, including their inclusion in its electoral list, and hopefully we get those fountains at the cross-sections.
Well, the Armenia Alliance said it is prepared to back whichever opposition candidate emerges as the leading contender for prime minister following the election, signaling a focus on consolidation across the opposition field. Arzavik Minasyan, an MP from the alliance, said their goal is to secure a parliamentary majority through unity, emphasizing that the elections should be about changing the government rather than simply winning mandates. If that was the case, I don't understand why these opposition forces didn't come together under one leader. Then they could have really been a contender, right, for civil contract and for Nikol Pashinyan. This way they're splitting up their vote.
Maybe what I interpreted as Serge Sarkisyan saying would have happened back then. Everyone would have voted for Pashinyan if they all got together.
Well, look, if they put Kocharian, that would have been problematic. But, I mean, they could have put somebody who was more appealing to the people. But, I mean, they have their political consultants. We're just journalists. But I'm just saying this now is kind of ridiculous, no?
Well, because it also gives them a little bit of leeway after the election. If it's too bad, they're like, oh.
Yeah, it wasn't us.
If there's a chance, they're like, oh, let's try again.
No. Well, his remarks suggest openness to supporting strong Armenia as candidate, who currently leads among all the opposition forces. Armenia Alliance wasn't even passing the threshold. Though our poll that we conducted two, the third one is coming up relatively soon, and the IRI's poll showed the party still trailing the ruling party. Artzvik Minasian also expressed confidence that the bloc will improve on its 2021 results and attract broader public support.
Much improvement would be needed for a broader public support.
And as always, we talk about the articles we published this week. One that got a lot of interest, and because as people who use public transportation in Yerevan or Armenia can attest to, it's called Anatomy of a Process, Yerevan's Metro. And we've been hearing about this subway system for, I don't know, I've been living in Armenia for 25 years. I've been hearing about it with every municipal election, ambitious promises, shifting timelines, stalled execution, and the long-delayed Achapnak station underscores deeper structural challenges in governance, planning, and accountability. A piece by our staff writer, Heranush Dermoyan. She loves doing these kinds of pieces and digging into the sort of process.
The anatomy of
a process, right.
Another piece by a staff writer, Hovannes Nazaretian, called Between Knowledge and Ideology, the Soviet Armenian Encyclopedia. This is not the typical piece that Hovannes usually does.
At all.
But he pitched it, and he wanted to write it. And
we finally relented.
And then we also didn't publish it for a while because it's about the Soviet Armenian Encyclopedia. It's not time sensitive.
At all.
So we kept it for a while. But it's interesting because he looks at, the story of how it came to be and what it meant for Armenia at the time, the decades of work that went into it, into having those volumes that we do that collect dust.
Mine does, for sure. I brought mine from Canada, by the way.
Someone brought it from Armenia to Canada, and then you brought it back.
And actually, we would buy the new volumes as they arrived in our, I don't know how we got them, but after I was married, so I have the whole set, gathering dust at the moment.
Anyway, he's looked into, the content and how ideology at the time shaped how certain things were relayed. And I really like that part, and how the first republic was the bourgeois republic, and then how all the Armenian political parties were presented as the mini bourgeois and the big bourgeois and the semi bourgeois, and those categories.
You're just a mini bourgeois, Rubina, just admit it.
No, you call me an elitist, though.
But you are that too. For sure.
I have not contested that.
Okay, well, our next piece by Arno Khelgatyan is called Armenians in Lebanon, a state within a state. He's done this quite extensive sort of history into the Armenian presence in Lebanon and how it's now really endangered because of war, upheaval. And you're from Lebanon, Rubina. I mean, obviously, you know this better than anyone. And it's really about the future of diaspora, identity, influence. It's an interesting piece for sure.
It's also kind of an anatomy of a process in its way, because it looks at how much later than some other diaspora communities Beirut became a center, what contributed to that, how the Armenian community survived throughout all the challenges that the country's had, and Lebanon has had.
Plenty.
More than plenty. And as everyone knows, it doesn't look very optimistic.
No, sadly, absolutely. A piece by Sosi Tatikian called Cognitive Warfare Toward a Resilience Framework for Armenia. And she looks at how modern conflict is really targeting societies. It's not about shooting missiles. It's really about playing with people's psyche and psychology and creating these culture wars. And it's a new term called cognitive warfare. And as always, you know, Sosi's pieces are quite long, and we even got her to cut 2 pages out, which I'm proud about. But something definitely to read.
And quite an exclusive piece that we published today. Well, it is April 24, and Naina Vlasian, she's managed to speak with Michele Wagner. He's the son of Armin Wagner. The piece is called Armin Wagner and the Burden of Witness. It's a Q&A, which we rarely do, but in this case, we had to kind of completely preserve his son's voice. And there's a lot of interesting details on how Wagner ended up in
the Ottoman Empire.
Why he photographed, and what it cost him eventually.
Yeah, and most of the photos that we've seen as descendants of survivors are really his photos. Like all of the photos of the women in the desert, the woman carrying the child, the starving woman, the children, the orphans. So many of those are his photos.
How he managed to take them out of the
Yeah,
Ottoman Empire, his relationship with his mother as well,
yeah, very
the
interesting.
communication, yes.
And on happier notes, our itinerary by Viken Galician. A lot of things happening in this city and this country, you know. The one thing that I really appreciate about Viken is he looks at things a little bit differently. So it's a list of events that are taking place in Armenia, from exhibitions to movies to theater. It's all of that. But what he said is, you know, Armenia exists against all odds. Everything says that we should not have existed or continued to exist. But he says it sits on a geological and civilizational fault lines that bind it to a state of perpetual unrest and becoming, in a world where, you know, globalizing homogeneity and extreme polarization generate total alienation and indifference. Any place that still produces the necessary tensions for defiance is one to be treasured. And I think, you know, as someone who's gone abroad, he's studied in Australia, New Zealand, and come back to Afghanistan. It was a really good one.
Also, in less poetic terms, Viken just chooses the list of events either he is interested in, loves, or
has
really
curated.
dislikes, has curated or really dislikes. So it's a
good mix.
Yeah, it's a very interesting mix because the commentary on every
I know, it's
and
hilarious,
each
some of it.
event is
It's very
interesting.
Vikenesque, yes.
And I did a podcast with Mikhail Zolian, who is a political analyst, but he also studies some things that are very interesting: politics of memory, nationalism, and post-Soviet societies. And it was a kind of a broad conversation, but we were concentrated on this concept of what is like this Fourth Republic that we're talking about. Was like, is it the Fourth Republic? Is it the Third Republic? Some recognize Soviet Armenia as a
Makes us sound so big
republic.
and powerful, right? The Fourth Republic.
Republic. Anyway, so his criteria of how things could be perceived, not necessarily for the sake of calling something a Third or Fourth Republic, but just like what their like the national breaks are in the anatomy of the process of Armenia's independence is. It was very interesting.
Yeah, he's a very interesting person and seems to have ruffled a few feathers, but that's good. That's the whole point, right? I mean,
It's a conversation.
yeah, absolutely.
It's not a prayer, so not everyone needs to agree.
Yes. Well, that's the kind of day it's been here in Armenia. Thank you for listening. Have a safe and peaceful weekend, and we'll be back again next week.